I won't make you do it. But so really, as a North West team, we're just trying to get in front of as many people as we can and try and make sure that if they notice something on their property that isn't right, they know who to call and the resources to look for. There we go. So firstly, what is pasture dieback? So it's best described as a complex condition that involves multiple factors, one of those being the pasture mealybug, or Heliococcus somervillei, and it results in the death of our susceptible grasses. So our susceptible grasses are C4 warm season growing perennials. Our C3 species, so our temperates like phalaris, ryegrass and prairie grass, there's been no reports of pasture dieback in them at this stage. Similarly, our broadleaf species, so our legumes, are unaffected, and so too are our annual fodder crops, so our oats and forage sorghums. Typically, the condition occurs in patches for a start, and those patches can spread quite rapidly depending on the seasonal conditions that we have at hand. And there's this photo here is from Nathan Jennings on the North Coast, and we can see that that patch has gotten quite large. So I'll just start here. This map is only current to June 2024, and I'll elaborate on where it's been found a bit more. But aside from a single report in 1928 around Karoi of pasture dieback, it wasn't until about the 1990s that there were some more reports up in central Queensland in Buffalo. But the 2015, that's when pasture dieback really started to impact the productivity of pastures in central Queensland. Now, obviously, it's spread quite far and wide from there, and it's probably gone a bit further west and a bit further south than anyone had ever anticipated. March 2020 was the first confirmed case in New South Wales, so just near the Tweed River at Murwillumbah. And speaking to my North Coast colleagues, it's still very prevalent in the North Coast, as they've got cases down around Coffs Harbour now. I also reached out to some of my Northern Tablelands colleagues. They've noted some dieback around Tenterfield on the eastern falls there and around Liston, so that light green has moved down slightly. April 2024 was the first confirmed case in the northwest. We found a few sites around Boggabilla, just over the border again. And then April 2025, I've found sites further south, so between Warrialda and North Star, and as well as a bit further west towards Boomai. I will also say that we are waiting on a formal identification of some mealybug that were found at Werris Creek on symptomatic plants, so it's a lot further south than we thought, and there's also been some confirmed cases in the recent weeks actually in the Hunter Valley. So really trying to get people looking in their pastures so we know where we're at and where the spread is. So what do we need for pasture dieback to occur? The first thing we need is a population of our susceptible species, so our C4s. If we have pasture mealybug population as well, then we may have pasture dieback, keeping in mind that it is quite random in its nature and sometimes hard to predict. There are other factors that can increase the prevalence and spread. So if we have a high biomass and active growth of those C4 susceptible species, as well as some nice warm humid conditions and a long growing season, we might see an increase in the spread and the prevalence of dieback in our region. Conversely, if we have cool, dry conditions that aren't favourable for the mealybug, or we have a pasture that's got a lot of biodiversity, so plenty of legumes and broadleafs that are unaffected, we're probably going to see a decrease in the prevalence and the spread. So what are we keeping an eye out for? Leaf discoloration is probably the first thing that you'll notice if you're keeping a pretty good eye out. It sort of generally starts at the top of the plants with the oldest leaves and then moves down, and that discoloration can range anywhere from yellow to orange, red and purple, which is a bit species dependent. So our yellow really seems to come through on our kikuyu, Rhodes grass, and in my experience our Gatton type pennix. Buffalo grass tends to go a bit orange or red, and our Paspalum and Premier Digit has a nice, really vibrant purple leaf. Also got to keep in mind, obviously, that there's plenty of other stresses on a plant that can cause leaf discoloration, whether it be cold, moisture stress, any other viral or fungal load, or a nutrient deficiency in the soil. But it's generally at this time, if we have a look in the pasture, that we'll see these little critters. So if we push the pasture back and look on the underside of the leaves or in the crown of the plant, we might be able to see some pasture mealybug. Now, pasture mealybug are most easily observed when it's nice and humid and warm. We've got good active growing conditions, so bit of rain recently, and everything's nice and green. So we can see this here is a mature female mealybug, and they're generally the easiest to spot. So they're pink to white, up to about 5 millimetres long, and we can see that they've got that filament or that meal on them. There's also some male and juvenile mealybug in these photos, but they're a lot smaller and they're translucent, so it can be a lot harder to pick up, particularly if you don't have a hand lens or you're a little bit blind, like myself. Male mealybug are also winged, but they can only fly short distances, so they just fly short distances to get to other females. But mealybug can be transported on the wind or potentially in water, moving across their environment as well, so that's how they move. Important to note that in cool or dry conditions, mealybug will go underground, so they've been found up to 800 mils below ground. So it's going to be a lot harder to find them if we're in a bit of a drought conditions or over winter, but we're really not going to notice any symptoms in our susceptible plants then anyway. They're either dormant or they're under moisture stress. The other thing to keep an eye out for is some unproductive plants or plants suffering from ill thrift that we can't really explain. I was talking to a producer north of Gundawindi. Anybody who's anything to do with buffel grass knows that you get a bit of rain, some nice quick active growth and a lot of fluffy heads pop up. And his first inkling that something wasn't right was when it didn't do that after some good rainfall. So he thought, well, there's nothing else that explains this. So he reached out and they found a lot of dieback on his property. From here, we move into plant death. So plant death can occur within a season if it's one of those long growing seasons like I mentioned before. Or the other thing that could happen is it goes into winter dormant and we don't get the response coming out in the spring. When we talk about plant death with pasture dieback, we refer to it as dead. So it's not senesced or dormant. The plant matter that's still on the ground is really grey, and you walk through and kick your feet and it just disintegrates. So just got to keep that one in mind, that when those C4 plants are gone, something's got to colonise that area. Generally, it's our broadleaf weeds because they're unaffected. Can be our can be our legumes if they're in the system, depending on the time of year or what sort of legumes you have in the system, or on the odd occasion some annual grass species. So we expect to have more broadleaf plant population in our impacted areas than outside. So if we have an area that hasn't got broadleaf growing, so nothing's growing, we might have to look a bit deeper because there might be something else at play there rather than dieback. So I'll just touch on this one really quickly. So species susceptibility, there's a few of these lists. I pulled this one from the Pasture Dieback Identification Guide, which is in all of your little cooler bags today. And there's a few MLA ones in that which I believe are being updated. So these lists just they utilise some glasshouse screening trials, pasture field trials, and the experiences of pasture agronomists. And they just try and give us a bit of an idea of where things sit within a given range. So they're not trying to be comprehensive and say this is where it sits. They're just trying to give us a bit of an idea. It's also important to note that this list is open to change. So all those factors I mentioned before can result in species having different symptoms from different regions. The other thing to note with the Pasture Dieback Identification Guide, obviously there's a few North West specific plants in there that we have a lot, but it is just in alphabetical order within those categories. So they're just trying to give us a bit of a range that they work in. So this table, I've adapted it. It was originally from the QDAF, or QDPI they are now, sorry, Future Beef site, and it just does a really good job at splitting things up and having some of those strategies and management practices that we might be able to put in place if dieback does turn up on our property. So the thing with having livestock on our properties, doing nothing isn't really an option for us, so we have to do something to actively manage it. And that may depend on whether that impacted area is quite small or large, and it's also going to depend largely on the topography and the soil type that you've got. If it's arable, we've got a few more options, but that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do. So one of the most widely used ones in Queensland is just managing for recovery. So it's just adjusting our stocking rate to match our stocking rate to our carrying capacity to allow those plants to recover from the seed bank. So if we have a nice, good seed bank of our desirables, the country can and will recover. We've just got to manage for that. We've got to control the weeds within those patches as well. and allow that to come back. We can also implement some pasture improvement, so whether that be sowing legumes or tolerant grasses, or the addition of fertiliser to generally address the deficiency after a soil test, preferably, please. Keeping in mind that pure nitrogen fertiliser, so our urea, have been seen in previous papers to increase the activity of sap-sucking pests, so that's our pasture mealybug. So just keep that in mind. The other thing too, if we've got country that's suitable for it, we might be able to sow a break crop, whether that's a fodder crop or something we're going to cut for silage to make up for that deficit in herbage mass that we've got, or it could be a grain crop to try and increase our cash flow and make up for that deficit. Down the bottom, we have controlling the mealybug. So lots of crosses, lots of question marks. There's currently, to my knowledge, no insecticide with a label that says you can spray mealybug in a pasture situation. There were a few permits issued by the APVMA in 2020, but they've since expired. So that was Memento and a few others. The costs seem to outweigh the benefits, particularly in the North West, where it's such a broad area and there's a lot of hectares to be sprayed. And as I mentioned before, the mealybug can be transported on the wind. So if they're in your area, there's no guarantee that they're not going to turn back up again. That, and if they're 800 mils underground, it's a bit hard to get any control. Burning, something done in Queensland for a little while, and there's a bit of anecdotal evidence that it might slow the spread, just sort of similar to heavy grazing or slashing. But if you look at the MLA management guide, there was actually negative results in terms of recovery once that country actually succumbed to pasture dieback. So whether that's a seed bank thing or not, I'm not too sure. But we do have options is the main thing from that table, and there's no silver bullet. So we're going to use probably a mixture of all of them, and we're going to assess it at a paddock level or even within a paddock as what's going to be most suitable for you. So just know that there are options that we can help with, and we can help you look into that. So I've got a few numbers up there where you can report dieback. I've also put my number up there and my email. More than happy for anybody, I'll leave it up there, to take any photos of that and give me a call at any time, or send me a message, send me an email. Whether it's a question that you've just thought of at night or you've heard something on the grapevines, I'm more than happy. I'm here full time, it's my job. So please do reach out. And I will just add too that if you do reach out to us and we do confirm the presence of pasture mealybug and dieback symptoms on your property, you've got nothing to worry about in terms of being shut down. The mealybug's actually endemic, so there's no quarantine measures or anything like that. We just really want to map the spread, and we map that at a parish level, so there's your details and location are not publicly displayed, so that we can really target our extension and surveillance and get in front of the people who may not know that they've got a problem. So yeah, just be aware that we're not going to go and shut you down and do anything like that. We just want to help. That's what we're here for. But yeah, more than happy for anyone to reach out at any time. I'll probably race through that a bit quicker than I should, but that's all right.
Hello, I noticed that the mealybug has a number of predators. Has there been any work done on releasing beneficial insects to manage mealybugs?
Yep, so I didn't touch on that because I was only meant to have 10 minutes today, but so there are plenty of generalist and mealybug specific predators that we have in our pastures. One of which is a ladybird mealybug, which their larvae looks a bit similar, so just keep that one in mind to a mealybug. So the work in Queensland has shown that yes, they can help out with the mealybug population, but I don't know if anybody's seen that predator-prey population relationship. So we've got the delayed response in the population of our predators to our prey. So by the time they get to a population that's actually useful at controlling the mealybug, we're already seeing symptoms. So that's just one thing we would keep in mind. But there are beneficial predators there, and they can help out.
Liam, just quickly, the grasses that we had up as susceptible appeared to be mostly introduced grasses rather than natives. What's the influence on your native seedlings?
So typically we see dieback impact our introduced species more than our natives. Whether that's a function of more monocultures or what, I'm not too sure. But there are natives that are impacted as well. We are seeing it, and as it moves further south, we're seeing a lot more. So I've noticed it in Bothria cloa. So it's B macra. So yeah, and but then yeah, it's very regional specific how they all work. Some grasses you go to, some areas you go to, the grass is standing up pretty well, and not. But yeah, so notionally, it was always assumed that like the introduced species were more impacted than than our natives. But that's not to say that the natives aren't susceptible and at risk as well.